He was born during the reign of an infamous ruler. He rose to political prominence through several emperors on his way to becoming arguably the greatest Roman historian of all time. But it was in the midst of catastrophe that he potentially offers us a glimpse of the historical Jesus. This is Bible Search and Rescue. I'm Chad Vinners, a Westar scholar and the director of Bible Search and Rescue. Our goal at Westar is to make biblical scholarship accessible to the general public. Today, we're continuing our series of videos looking at the question, is there historical evidence for Jesus outside of the New Testament? Our videos on Bible Search and Rescue are shorter surveys of some difficult topics. They aren't meant to be exhaustive, but to provide you with some insights and resources to explore these subjects on your own. In our first video, we examined the writings of the Jewish historian Josephus, looking for potential information about Jesus. Now we're turning to a Roman author to see what he might tell us about Jesus as we look at the writings of Tacitus. Publius Cornelius Tacitus was born around 56 CE in Gaul, during the early portion of Emperor Nero's reign. It is believed that his father was a Roman knight who served as a Roman procurator. Tacitus followed his father into politics, becoming a senator at the age of 25. He eventually served as a legionary commander and became a consul by the age of 42. During Tacitus's lifetime, he saw civil war, the fall of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, and the rise and fall of the Flavian dynasty. In addition to continuing a political career that lasted the rest of his life, he became a historian and spent over 2 decades writing works that have become of monumental importance for understanding Roman history, such as the Histories and the Annals. Tacitus's Annals was his last published work before his death around 120 CE. It provides a penetrating look at the Julio-Claudian dynasty, which had its beginnings with the rise of Julius Caesar and comprised the first wave of Roman emperors from Augustus to Nero. In fact, it's Tacitus's writings about Nero in the Annals that catches our attention when looking for information about Jesus outside of the New Testament. Nero reigned from 54 to 68 CE. We're going to examine a section from Book 15 of the Annals, where in 64 CE, a disaster struck the city of Rome. J.C. Yardley did an excellent translation of the Annals for Oxford World Classics, and we'll be using that version for today's excerpts. Annals 1538 begins with the following. A disaster followed. Whether accidental or plotted by the emperor is unclear, for the sources have both versions. But it was worse and more calamitous than all the disasters that have befallen this city from raging fires. Tacitus has set the scene by telling us 2 important things. A horrifying fire erupted in the city, and it may have actually been planned by the emperor. He continues. The blaze spread wildly, overrunning the flat areas first, and then climbing to the heights before once again ravaging the lower sections. It outstripped all defensive measures because of the speed of its deadly advance and the vulnerability of the city. In addition, there was the wailing, panic-stricken women. There were people very old and very young. There were those trying to save themselves and those trying to save others, dragging invalids along or waiting for them. And often, as they looked back, they found themselves under attack from the flames at their sides or in front. Eventually, unsure what to avoid and what to head for. They crowded the roads or scattered over the fields. Even though escape lay open to them, some chose death because they had lost all their property, even their daily livelihood. Others did so from love of family members whom they had been unable to rescue. And nobody dared fight the fire. There were repeated threats from numerous people opposing efforts to extinguish it, and others openly hurled in firebrands and yelled that they had their instructions. This was to give them more freedom to loot, or else they were in fact under orders. A lot is happening here. We learned that a fire, whose origins are unknown, breaks out, and it's a devastatingly fast fire that starts burning through the city. It's moving so fast that people are getting caught in the flames and are losing everything. But Tacitus also claims that there were people actively preventing efforts to fight the fire, claiming they were under orders. He tells us it's possible that this was done so they could loot more, but the rumors that men were under orders to spread the fire was leading to something bigger. Tacitus says that the fire lasted for 5 days before it was finally stopped, but then it broke out again. Rome was divided into 14 districts, and at the conclusion of this devastation, 4 were intact, 3 districts had been completely leveled, and 7 had only a few ruined buildings remaining. The destruction was truly catastrophic. Nero wasn't in the city at the time, but rumors began to spread that while the blaze was spreading, he appeared on his private stage singing about the destruction of Troy while his capital was burning. This is where the popular myth of Nero fiddling while Rome burned came from. While he is reported to have taken steps to help those affected by the fire, he also took advantage of the opportunity and built a decadent new palace. It appears that Nero became aware of the rumors and needed to take public steps to try and alter his poor public image. This meant public efforts of currying favor with the gods. The next step was to find ways of appeasing the gods, and the Sibylline books were consulted. Under their guidance, supplicatory prayers were offered to Vulcan, Ceres, and Proserpina, and there were propitiatory ceremonies performed for Juno by married women, first on the capital, and then on the closest part of the shoreline. Rome was a deeply religious society, and the common belief was that disaster had to be the result of the gods being angry about something. It's not really that much different from what one sees in the modern United States. When something bad happens to society, there are no shortage of people who quickly claim that it's a result of God being angry with the people for being disobedient. The same thing is happening with the fire, but the assumption is it's disobedience to the Roman gods that's the problem. And this brings us to the focus of our video. Tacitus writes the following: "But neither human resourcefulness, nor the emperor's largesse, nor appeasement of the gods could stop a belief in the nasty rumor that an order had been given for the fire. To dispel the gossip, Nero therefore found culprits on whom he inflicted the most exotic punishments. These people were hated for their shameful offenses, whom the common people called Christians. The man who gave them their name, Christus, had been executed during the rule of Tiberius by the procurator Pontius Pilate. The pernicious superstition had been temporarily suppressed, but it was starting to break out again, not just in Judea, the starting point of that curse, but in Rome as well, where all that is abominable and shameful in the world flows together and gains popularity. As we just discussed, Nero is making public overtures about appeasing the Roman gods in the midst of this disaster. Notice the way Tacitus describes those that he calls Christians, the pernicious superstition. That word superstition, which is the Latin superstitio, is important for understanding what's being said here. Being deemed a superstitio in the Roman mindset was not a good thing. The closest modern equivalent might be the word cult. Tacitus and the larger public viewed these Christ people as being a cult. And just as today, when we brand groups cults to attach a negative stigma to them, the same is being done here. The word superstitio could be placed on groups for a variety of reasons, such as being depraved or strange or a foreign religion. Those who were considered to be practitioners of magic or divination could also be deemed a superstitio. Devotion to the Roman gods was an essential aspect of Roman life. Being deemed a superstitio could mean that the people involved in this cultic behavior were viewed by the general public as putting the public at risk by angering the true gods who protect society. This again is much like one sees in modern day US political dialogue, but in reverse. People constantly talk about how if we don't go back to traditional Christian values, which usually means US values from some previous idealized era that people deem Christian, God will take away his favor from the United States and we will no longer be a superpower. What Tacitus is describing is something similar, except that the Christians are on the opposite side of the equation. Because they are a superstition, a cult, not only are they potentially upsetting the gods by not following traditional values, they are inherently suspicious, which gave Nero an opportunity to blame them. Tacitus continues. And so at first, those who confessed were apprehended, and subsequently, on the disclosures they made, a huge number were found guilty, more because of their hatred of mankind than because they were arsonists. Tacitus goes on to describe how the Christians were tortured by beasts, crucified, and even lit on fire and used as torches in Nero's personal garden. Notice how he seems to doubt the accusation that they started the fire, but he says their punishment came more as a product of hatred for their fellow human beings. He doesn't really clarify why he believes this, but as a superstition, they were inherently suspicious. He does note that the torments got so bad, people did actually start to feel sorry for the Christians. In terms of what we learned about Jesus in this passage, it's pretty minimal. Notice that Tacitus doesn't even call him Jesus. The extent of the details he provides are that Christus was the founder of the superstition and that he was executed by Pontius Pilate. He doesn't say why he was executed or even what the method of execution was. In a sense, it may not have been important to Tacitus. He knew Christus as a practitioner of superstition and the founder of a destructive cult. He undoubtedly believed Jesus to be a corrupt figure. Perhaps he realized that the superstition was rooted in Judaism, given its origins in Judea, but it's hard to say. Realistically, the only reason for mentioning Jesus was likely because it connected the name Christus to Christian, and sharing that the founder of this cult had been executed by the Roman government gave a bit of context to the nefarious origins of the superstition and the fact that its followers, like their founder, were still being executed. This mention of Jesus has been subject to scrutiny, similar to what we saw in our last video with the writings of Josephus. Some have argued that the line about Christ being executed by Pilate is an interpolation, meaning it was inserted by a scribe into the text. It wasn't actually written by Tacitus. First, we know that the oldest surviving manuscript of Tacitus read Christiani, not Christiani. This seems to be related to a well-known misspelling in which in Greek, Christos was sometimes given a variant Chrestos. Christos, which meant anointer or plasterer, seemed like a strange name for a person or group, whereas Christos meant something like worthy or excellent. Even if Roman audiences didn't think Christians or Jesus were worthy or excellent, they may well have believed that's what the name intended. The Christian apologist Justin Martyr actually discusses this misunderstanding in his first apology. The original text read Christiani, not Christiani, which was corrected by a later scribe in the margins of the text, which you can see in this picture. That doesn't mean the whole passage was altered. Rather, it could just as well mean it was a basic correction for spelling. Another issue is that Pontius Pilate is described as a procurator when we know he was a prefect. Procurators overseeing jurisdictions like Judea was a Claudian reform prior to Tacitus's time. It's been argued that prefect and procurator were sometimes interchangeable, though it seems more likely that Tacitus used a term that his audience was more familiar with, as Judea in his time was overseen by a procurator, not a prefect. It seems more plausible that Tacitus either understood Pilate to be a procurator, as was the standard in his own day, or he used the term to clarify for his audience. As to the line about Christus being an interpolation, this section doesn't have the same issues that we saw with Josephus. If a later Christian scribe were going to insert something about Jesus into the passage, which wasn't originally there, it seems odd they wouldn't include more. A single line that doesn't give his name or even the manner of his death is a strange thing for a Christian to insert later. The natural question would be, why add this information that doesn't really say anything of substance? All of the sources used for this video are in the description, so you can review the literature and consider it for yourself. So what does Tacitus tell us about Jesus? Very little. In fact, we get less detail from him than we did from Josephus, who also had very little to say. A man named Christus was executed by Pilate in Judea, and he founded what the Romans considered to be a cult. That doesn't tell us a lot. We know when Pilate was in office and where, but all that really gives us is a 10-year window of time when a person in Judea was executed. Why was he executed? Tacitus doesn't say. Jesus isn't mentioned by Tacitus because Tacitus thought he was of particular significance. He merited a brief mention exclusively as a backdrop to explain where Christian superstition came from. For Tacitus, Jesus was essentially a footnote to a bizarre little group of people that had found themselves in a difficult situation during Nero's time. In our next video, we'll be looking at an author who had a lot to say about Jesus, which wasn't appreciated by followers of Jesus. We'll be exploring the writings of Celsus. On behalf of the Westar Institute, thank you for joining us for Bible Search and Rescue. I'm Chad Binners, encouraging you to continue questioning and seeing where scholarship can take you.